thank you very much, and I promise to probably not take up that much time because I'm really a user of a lot of the modeling and data that you're talking about. I apologize for not being with you in person. I particularly like the brownies after lunch. The agenda for the meeting is quite provocative to me. I'm now on slide 2. Are you, if I call this slide number, will that work okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so I'm a longtime fan of lots of folks that are in the room, particularly Jan Semenza, George Luber, and many of the other colleagues. For this presentation, I'd like to thank a number of my UCLA colleagues, Institute of the Environment, Atmospheric Sciences, and of course the Public Health School. I've got LA County Department of Public Health. They have 4,000 employees, and environmental health is a big part of this. And we began to realize that the rank and file of the environmental health practice community doesn't understand and isn't aware or feels impotent facing many of the threats we're looking at. I also thank in here the State of California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And just a sidebar here, traditionally that group has been quite focused on toxicology, and they've been going through a shift of looking at a much broader set of impacts, and some of the slides I'm showing come out of a 150-page report that they put out late last year. It's really excellent. I'm in slide 4 now, and the big messages I want to convey: all environmental health is local. We learned this lesson with lead poisoning, with a whole series of other issues, both toxic and otherwise, but also the political process. And coarse scale data is often not as useful as it should be, and I'll come back to that. I've been pushing very hard on built environment and health, better designed cities, more walkable cities, those that can counteract obesity and activity, but big carbon footprint. And it's a way of both mitigating, but it's also a way of adapting to the threats we're looking at. I'm going to look at some lessons from both modeling and leadership in California and New York, and I want to assert the need for much more aggressive post-event assessments. And maybe you've all done this, but and I'll talk about some successes and failures in environmental public health. I'm on slide 5, and my own background is I was head of both infectious disease and also of environmental health in California for about a dozen years. I grew a number of those programs and dealt with really hard environmental issues. The Loma Prieta and Northridge earthquakes, the Oakland Hills fire alone took out 2,300 homes and cost billions of dollars and quite a number of lives. The Los Angeles riots, the big metam sodium spill in the Sacramento River. And I've had a real immersion in the difficulties and challenges of public health communication, both to sister agencies that ought to be using our data and also to the public overall. On slide 6, I also talk about my CDC experience. I spent 9 years at the National Center for Environmental Health. Jan Semenza was with us during the Chicago heat wave and did some of the most important documentation of that event. Was involved in many hurricanes. The one that really struck me was Hurricane Floyd, and going through the cities out in the lower Piedmont out towards the ocean and seeing, flying by helicopter and seeing large fields with lagoons full of pig and other kinds of manure being sprayed across the water because they were trying to de-water the way we were growing our agriculture. They're quite striking when you see coffins floating through the middle of the street because of the water level rising so high. Very impressed during that time in the late 90s with the excellence of the FEMA folks. Grand Forks and other flooding in the Mississippi River, we were asked by the Senate and the Congress to create the National Pharmaceutical Stockpile in the late 90s, well before 2001, and it cost in the range of $500 million. So we've been prepared for all of this, but we certainly weren't prepared for September 11th. And at that point, the Emergency Operations Center grew from maybe half a dozen people and several tables and computers to a major operation, which is working right now on Ebola and, of course, anthrax. I had the chance, and I believe that George's Benjamin was there earlier, to take an assignment at Roosevelt House, or actually a fellowship, in New York City, not too far from Central Park. Tom Farley was there as well, a former health officer of New York City. And I went to New York thinking, oh, I'm from California. I know a lot about climate change and prevention, and got there and realized that we Californians really had a lot to learn from the New York region as they confronted Superstorm Sandy. I was there about a year later, and the challenges of rebuilding. One of the things that was striking to me is the predicted sea level rise and water immersion. This picture number 8 is what put out 10 years before Superstorm Sandy, and it actually predicts pretty well where the flooding was going to be. And one wonders, as diligent as the modelers were, how well they penetrated the consciousness of a lot of major political leaders and public works and other administrative leaders during the whole time. I'm a Jersey guy, so I probably went through the Hudson Tubes, that's what we call PATH, 1,000 times in my life going over to New York. I thought it was rather routine and casual, and to see that major Trans-Hudson artery tunnel filling with the Hudson River, and the same experience up on the north side of Queens, seeing LaGuardia filled. By the way, the airlines have the ability to know in advance and to get their aircraft way far out of town. And LaGuardia is equipped with pumps to remove the water when it comes, but it's still very impressive to see landscapes that we know very well. I did a TV series for PBS in New York for a couple hours, and was hosted by, it was up in the Tisch Studios near Lincoln Center, and Mike Schneider, the host, said how unnerving it was to see rivers of water right outside Lincoln Center pouring down the steps of the subway platforms. And I would say Sandy was as iconic and influential in people's lives as was September 11th. The upper left picture is out near in Jamaica Bay, and with Bill Selecki, and I don't know if Bill is there, a geography professor at Hunter, visited a whole series of locations out on the barrier islands, but also towards a much more residential and suburban areas in town. I remember the day we visited, and they were going through, the name is slipping out of my mind, it'll come to me in a second, and they were cutting down sycamore after sycamore tree, and it was this beautiful suburban landscape that was losing literally thousands, tens of thousands of their trees, big, healthy trees, but no longer healthy because the salt intrusion had killed trees because of the overwash that weren't salt tolerant. I never thought that houses and land on the Raritan Bay, Union Beach, New Jersey, does not face the Atlantic. It actually faces north and towards New York City, with Sandy Hook protecting it. Again, the immensity of the washover and folks not being prepared for it. This is not a picture of a Carmack sales lot. It is an unused airfield in the New York region. I'm on slide 12. And what's striking to me about it is there were 250,000 vehicles damaged, but what was particularly remarkable to me is with 5 days warning and with these maps of knowing where we were going to see flooding, to have that kind of economic damage on top of the health and other threats was really quite striking. And the next slide, which is actually it'll be slide 15, I'm on 14 now, that the models did a pretty good job of predicting where we were going to see the flooding. And you're more expert than I may not be precisely correct, but to a physician's eye, gee, what they were saying is going to happen kind of is what happened. But this is the one that struck me. New Jersey Railroad Transit was out of commission for almost 6 months, a number of their major lines, after Superstorm Sandy. And one of the things that was striking, they had purchased $120 million worth of new rolling stock, and with the storm coming, had parked it over in a place they didn't think was going to flood. Actually, and predictably it did, and they lost that enormous amount of public assets. So there's a larger message I want to convey from slide 15, which is a lot of rank and file workers don't know how to read and understand the models that are being put out. I understand political and other issues and people being pressed with other things, but I don't think we've done a very good job of communicating our data to ordinary people. And it was ordinary workers in the transit authority that saved many of the subway stations in New York. It wasn't simply the high-level leadership. Because of this feeling that we needed to get the message out to more of the rank and file in public health, and Hillary Godwin was the leader on this, some thoughts about climate change training, slide 16, at the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. And one thing that was very important in this training was Dr. Fielding, Jonathan Fielding, the county health officer, and Angelo Bellomo, the head of all of environmental health. This is an enormous department, said, we're going to do this training, and you, the rank and file, need to go and learn about why climate change is important to your profession. And I could easily imagine someone that was inspecting restaurants, swimming pools, and doing very important day-to-day but fee-supported environmental health work would say, oh, this is a million years away. Why do I need to worry about this? And so and this is a takeaway message, top-down leadership is important, but then to get the rank and file to step up. By the way, Hillary Godwin just won the top professor at UCLA award, and I want to commend her for that. She's an associate dean here. Here are the first half dozen workshops, and it really is the big picture. This is slide 18. What are the populations that are vulnerable? What is climate change? How do you adapt? 10 things you ought to know. How do you communicate? And I'll come back to communication. And what will LA be like in 2050 to 2100? You've all seen these slides. You're tired of looking at them, but the average person is kind of shocked to see that since the time that Disneyland opened, that we've seen about 100 millimeter increase in sea level globally. That the oceans are getting warmer. And again, these are big issues. You know them, but I'm going to drill down in a minute to much more local issues. Slide 21, a lot of us were kind of astounded. And I spent a whole year studying nothing but climate change after I left my CDC job because I felt it was the most important public health issue, environmental public health issue that we as a civilization face. And even I wasn't aware of this slide to the same degree of carbon in the ocean. And I have a later slide of CO2 and pH changes. So we started big, and Hillary and the colleagues and the students started big, but then began to drill down to what does this mean in our backyard? All environmental health is local. What's going to happen on sea level and ecosystems and the rest? What are the regulatory and legal challenges around rainwater, stormwater, gray water, recycled water? Water in California is power, it's electricity, it's influence, it's development. So here's the California data since over the last 100 years or so. And you can see during the Dust Bowl that it was hotter, but the long-term trend for California, not far away in our own backyard, has gone up. Everyone in California is extraordinarily aware of the importance of wildfires. Every one of us have awakened someday and been having difficulty breathing with our eyes burning because of the wind blowing from the wrong direction from the enormous wildfires we're seeing. And more and more people are moving into traditionally forested areas, oftentimes with less public services and less firefighting capability. So the wildfires have gone up, and impact on infrastructure, not just water, but also electrical and grid and wildlife is evident as well. Here's acres burned by wildfires since 1981 to 2000. Here's what's going to happen with business as usual in the fall. And here's what's going to happen in the summertime. So we're already seeing this. We're seeing more and more fires after the spring, which is unusual. I was up in Yosemite in August and drove through, it almost brought tears to my eyes, about 15 miles, the most beautiful ponderosa and other forests, and just blackened and scarcely a shrub alive 2 years later because they were such hot fires. A busy slide, but again, anyone that likes seafood is sad and really reaching out to what people care about. This is slide 26, that the changes in the pH in Monterey Bay, in places that are iconic in the California consciousness, is going down. Major seafood source for California. And in fact, probably every dock in California tells people to eat less meat and eat more seafood. And this is possibly not the most important outcome, but again, you want to go with something that people really understand. And the visibility of Lake Tahoe, something the state's taken great pride in. You could look down 100 feet and see a disk in the water back in 1965, and now it only is about half that, 70 feet as well. Again, speaking to things people know about and care about. One of the presentations during the teaching was the folks, Alex Hall's staff in Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences, talking about what we expect the climate in California or northern LA County to be like going forward. One of the challenges, as Alex and his colleagues pointed out, was that much of the data is very large scale, and to get the fine and granular scale, which we in public health want to know that. We want to know what the birth defect or cancer rates or lung disease rates or asthma rates are in relatively refined areas, and this is slide 29 I'm looking at. But when you go to a movie, particularly in the San Francisco area, that you'll see somebody dressed in a T-shirt and somebody else in a parka, and they were probably correctly dressed when they got up. The microclimates here are shockingly different. By going with finer and finer grids, the folks in Alex's group both documented the failure of, or at least the inadequacy of, regional modeling, and I'm now on number 29, and the importance of reaching out into people's own backyards. All environmental health is local. And how to come up with a higher level of resolution to capture the fine scale differences, slide 30. So I'm back to slide 31, and here's a finer grid that they have laid out, and then looking at what would be the change in much tighter grids that a local politician, a local elected official, a local environmental health director would go, oh, that's my backyard. Let me see if I'm now comparing, I'm on slide 33, average August temperature, a relatively small grid here, not that small, with the average August temperature just 40 to 50 years later. So again, people can see, oh, these are the changes in my own backyard. And this should have been a stack slide that would appear in sequence, but again, showing these increases, Porter Ranch, Santa Clarita, these are big changes. Around UCLA is in Westwood, and we're not going to see such big temperature increases. For example, likelihood of being over 100 days a year, very extremely hot weather in Santa Clarita and many of the areas in the valley to the north of us. I'm now on slide 35, and as I mentioned, everything, water is the critical issue in California. The California aqueduct that is coming out of the Delta and down from Sacramento, there are two of them actually. 20% of all the electricity in California is used to push water over the Tehachapi's. That's how much investment and energy goes into this, and why I say energy and water are very much alike. The other big source of water is the Colorado River, and Nevada, Mexico, Arizona are very unhappy about how much water Southern California is pulling out of the Colorado River. I was thinking to myself, watching Madison Bumgarner pitch for the Giants, that fellow could throw a baseball across the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. It looks huge, but it's completely drained. There's virtually nothing reaching Mexico, and the LA aqueduct come from the Owens Valley and Mono Lake. So the point of this is, with diminishing water sources, diminishing glacier snowpack in the mountains, LA is going to be looking more and more to groundwater, more and more to water recapture. We actually get enough water during the wintertime if we could capture it on site to get us through the summer. Too much of the water is now being slushed down culverts and a concrete-clad river into the ocean that needs to be captured here and to be used over time. We're going to have to stop using drinking water to flush toilets, and at least unused and pristine drinking water to flush toilets and irrigate our homes. And we're going to be looking at much more use of recaptured, reused water going into the future. I have strong feelings about desalination, and we can come to that in the Q&A. California's worked hard on the greenhouse gas reduction, AB 32, and we were ridiculed. I remember reading the New York Times. It was making fun of California, and Governor Schwarzenegger was, so the Green governor, and Governor Brown has really kept up a real substantial effort in terms of climate change. I remember reading business interests saying, rich people will flee California because taxes will go up, and these silly laws you're putting in place to change fuel mixes to do cap and trade on energy production as well. By the way, none of that's happened, and there's no evidence that there is an out-migration because of climate change, cap and trade, and other measures have been put in place. This is the document from Cal EPA from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And I've only got 3 or 4 more slides. This is slide 37 that I'm looking at right now. And I'm really proud that they have thought about big issue environmental health, and I want them very much to stay involved in toxicology and traditional toxicologic environmental health. But this issue is so enormous, we need to be doing it. Have they made progress? Look at slide 38. So everyone in this room who's listening is worried about black carbon. We don't want to see it on our glaciers, on our poles, and to see this kind of decline in black carbon, the bluish-gray line going down, both California and EPA data, and the use of distillate fuels or cleaner fuels with less carbon production. So there's real progress, and we're in the process in California of pushing this even further, and we're getting a big pushback from the oil industry. They did previously had a Proposition 32, the reverse of AB 23, to kill these greenhouse gas reduction efforts, but it failed with overwhelmingly in the polls a couple of years ago. They've got another new effort, probably trying to push it, not probably, they will try to push it through the legislature to kill greenhouse gas reduction efforts as well. We peaked in California with our greenhouse gas production in 04, 05, 06. The slide's a little deceptive because it starts at 350, so it kind of looks like methane is contributing as much as CO2, and of course there's an awful lot of CO2 below that. But these efforts to reduce loading have worked. Well, it must have ruined the economy, right? We've reduced fossil fuel consumption. Well, let's look at slide 40. Since the year 2000, we've seen a 1% year increase in population in California, the maroon line. We've seen the greenhouse gas emissions, the yellowish-orange line, dropping. Well, has the economy gone bad? No. Here's the state's gross state product in 2005 dollars, and it's gone up with a dip, of course, in 2008-09, but it's on its way up again. But fascinatingly enough, a 35% decrease in emissions per $1,000 of gross state product. So this has not been bad for the economy, and as we put in green infrastructure, whether it's solar roofs, other kinds of solar arrays, wind turbines, and others, and other interventions, it may be a way of adding to the state's economy rather than to undermine it. So some big takeaways, and I say this to folks that do modeling but also have to interface with elected officials. I would say that an awful lot of leaders still lack knowledge. I don't think they knew as much as our average environmental health professional knew after the dozen or so hours that were spent with them doing the training around climate change. And I'm always frustrated when public health leaders shy away from environmental health issues because they're seen as not being winnable battles. Well, I'm going to assert that in the short term, very little of what we do in environmental health is a winnable battle. I mean, you could shock treat a swimming pool with too much algae in it, but beyond that, most of the things we do take a generational approach. And I think we're going to have to figure out how to have some of these efforts be fee supported, because right now people are being driven by what pays the bills. Slide 42, leaders really do matter. And I talked about Jonathan Fielding and Angelo and the folks that were running the health department really deciding their folks needed to know this, that the drills in planning, and part of the drills in planning is how do you look at these maps? How do you look at the data that you folks are providing? So sort of an odd statement here. Disaster locations with more capital do better. After the fires in Oakland, it was a relatively prosperous community up on the Oakland Hills. They were built, and virtually all the wires, all utilities were undergrounded. The homes were made far more fireproofed with non-wood roofs and the rest. But what the insurance industry calls many disasters, if they occur in a place with lots of financial capital, they call them accelerated depreciation. And so there is an opportunity there. But the other point I want to make is they're more than just financial capital, that the social capital is so important. Communities with good social capital recover more quickly. Those with, if you will, cultural capital, the narrative matters. Is it a narrative of recovery or destruction? And the local strengths really matter. I want to just say this to the modelers here. Every elected official understands maps. They don't understand it to the degree you do, but they all study maps all the time. And presenting your data in a way that an elected official knows and can care about it is a wonderful contribution that you can be making. A couple more quick thoughts. Slide 43. I wonder how many of the people in your room who are modelers have ever been in an incident command situation. Incident command, you usually have a uniformed leader calling all the operations. I was out on the pier after September 11th. In that case, it was the Mayor Giuliani, with 100 people running and doing what was commanded during that time. I'm going to say something, which is most of these incident commanders are very good about threats they can see, and they're extremely nervous about threats that are somewhat invisible, whether it's infectious, it's radiation, or it's toxicologic. And our data on where it is and how long it's going to last is extremely important, and being able to convey it in a way that a harried public safety officer can understand is very important. The next line I'm going to give is, I have to say, too many public health leaders think that public health communication is talking to people. And communication is a two-way street, and I am always shocked at how poorly I see, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, often, not listening enough and really thinking about it and checking out, do people understand well what we're doing? I remember those public health leaders underestimate staffing needs. I remember after the fires and earthquakes, when I was the health officer in the state, I would ask the local leader, do you need any help? And they would say, no, we're fine. And I'd call the next day. I'm happy to send down epidemiologists and nurses and other people. No, we're fine. Next day I would call and say, how's it going? They say, damn it, I need help. Where are you? So I think it's important to get there early and to really think about the communication much sooner in the process. And disasters highlight gaps and needs, but embedded in them is a real chance for opportunity. And so Daniel Burnham, the man that designed the Great White City of 1894, the World's Fair at that time, actually had a design for the rebuilding of San Francisco when the earthquake came. He had a great line, which was, make no small plans, that we need to think about how we're going to rebuild, because a lot of what we built is not great stuff, and we need to rebuild in smarter ways. So just to summarize, my next to last slide, 44, accessibility, updating your slide, your information afterwards. We have an ugly saying in medicine, which is, you learn the most from the patients you kill. And I see it with architects and planners where they'll lay out a design, people will move into a building, and no one really looks at the viability, the utility, the limitations of what's been designed and what's been planned. Does it really work for people? And did our models really work? Did they really inform people to make smart decisions is another way to think about this. I've gone very quickly, and I'm at slide 45, and I'm going to stop at that point and be open for dialogue. And it's sure strange not being able to check out the body language, but I hope you're all well. Thank you.
Thank you. So, questions, please, from the audience. Well, I have one initial question. You made a comment about desalination in the beginning. You thought we could follow up with. So what is your view on desalination?
Hi, it sounds like John Balbus, but I can't tell.
Actually, it's not, but that's okay.
We're doing our best to reduce carbon loading into the atmosphere, the use of fossil fuels. The plant they've built down in Orange County, it uses a lot of fossil fuel. I know that they're going to come up with more efficient ones. There may be ways of doing this with solar, but in a city, for example, that essentially wastes extraordinarily high quality water, and we're not doing enough making sure the water is going into the ground. We put too much of it into sluices and run it out of town, and we need to do a lot more water recapture. If you have to do desalination, you have to do it, but it would seem to be a difficult decision in the face of climate change where we're trying to reduce carbon loading to the atmosphere. And it's easy to imagine that our prosperous communities can afford it, but our poor communities really are carrying the brunt. And I forgot to mention this. Under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act and the cap and trade is really going to kick in very strongly in the next 6 months. It's raised about $1 billion, and I think 25% of that has to go to the poorest communities, with the feeling that they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of climate change most. And it has to go to, if you will, climate change reduction, quality of life improvement. One can't simply go out and buy a new car with that. The money's got to go to community improvement in these particularly most impacted and fragile locales. And just to go back to the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, they're the ones that laid out the protocol for decision about where that money would be allocated.
Okay, we have one question here before we take the break, so please.
Yeah. Hi, Dick. This is Jerry Poggi with SOEH. One of the things that you described is the issue of there are signals from single events that can really propel a lot of activity and action and planning, but they wane over time, so memory gets lost and people don't really stick at it the way they should. Do you have any advice on how to keep a leadership developed and trained and capable of holding memories of other past events that might allow for those decision makers to really keep the public health infrastructure vibrant and resilient to meet these challenges?
Great comment, Jerry. My own experience in California is that it often helps to pull together a consulting advisory committee that has high visibility, and we can get media coverage for their various meetings, and to have a prestigious group in real time deliberating and being reported on this so that they say, here are the things we want done. Too often study groups, and I would say this to an extent about the academy as much as I love it, the work is done in camera. It's hidden. The new archbishops of risk assessment go off and work and then come back and make pronouncements. And I think the more visible some of our decisions are made, the more that the debate it comes out, it creates its own political initiative. Virtually everything, in my opinion, and people can challenge me, virtually all the progress we have made in environmental public health has come because of something going wrong. And the challenge that the leaders in public health have is we're constantly being pulled onto the next threat, the next threat, the next threat. But how do we have the team that's, for example, is going to retroactively assess, what happened here? How do we evaluate? What are the lessons learned? How do we create the political pressure to make the changes that are needed? And too often in our society, and I'm going to be very slightly belligerent here, which is in our society, people who will make pronouncements about climate change who are looking for office. Well, the next sentence will be, well, I'm not a scientist. And then you turn around and you say to the scientist, well, what do you think? And they'll say something, but they're not allowed to be on the news. I've heard many a reporter complain bitterly about the inaccessibility of a lot of the leadership in health and public health and elsewhere after they go through 3 levels of filters by PR and other people. And I would say CDC is even in that boat.
We're going to have to go to the break, but I thank you very much. This was a fantastic talk, and thanks to the speakers this afternoon. We are a little bit delayed, so I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break, reconvene at 4:25, and if all the panelists can reconvene up here to be ready to go at 4:25, that would be great. So thank you. We'll see you in a few moments.